Welcome to the Monos Pod, episode 3 with Tino and Matt. What's up, Matt?
How's it going?
It's good,
I
man.
like your hat.
What's the what's the origin of the ASU hat for you?
My sister-in-law went to ASU for a couple of years, and our pal from the league, Dershimer, Soul Kitchen is from Arizona. So I before kids, I used to go out and see him a lot.
Awesome. I thought it was Barry Bonds,
Got
which I would
a
have
Green Day
supported.
shirt on today too. So
Nice, kind of. So this episode we're gonna do a kind of cover each of our initial top 100 for um, dynasty minor leaguers. We both put together our top 100s without any consultation with each other. We're going to talk a little bit about the mechanics and how we looked at players personally, and then we'll dive into the top 100 in groups of 10 from the bottom up. So Matt, why don't you explain a little bit what goes through your head and some of the filters that you use when evaluating minor league players for Dynasty?
all right, so I think the process for me started a couple years ago when I was resetting my hybrid team in our current league. We're 15 keepers, 15 draftees. So I was always starting in 220. I was keeping my own top 50 list and continuing to update it. I liked looking at other lists and models. One thing I like about Pipeline is they remain consistent. They don't have any. They like to look at what they had formerly and work off that. So I've been trying to remain consistent there. Part of my weakness is if a player gets really hot and everybody is excited about the player, I always want to move that player up and move a player down that started 1 month into the minors
Right,
bad.
right.
So this is it's kind of a good check on me to remain consistent and to go with my, you know, I'll be open to saying I made a mistake on this player, but also at the same time being open to, well, my first nudge on this player is that this player was, had talent and
Right,
maybe just going through a slump. So
right.
that's the first thing. Last year I joined a dynasty league with over 40 keepers.
Mhm.
That made me think about expanding a list. So you have to go not only beyond 50, but beyond 100. So that had me paying attention more. So some
Mhm.
of the players that I was kicking off my top 50, I would start collecting down below.
Mhm. Love it. So I think one of the things that you hit on that I find interesting in terms of evaluation is I always have to determine whether an outlet's rankings are for reading clicks or what they actually believe, right? So you see players, in order to get people to go to their site and read, they have to update things often.
Hmm.
And there has to be something that's some sort of draw, right? Some sort of player that needs to pop. And I do think that if they're smart and running their businesses smartly, they do that. But I try to take that into account when creating my own ranks because I'm not one, I don't we're not popular enough yet, to worry about that sort of thing. But also, these are all rankings that I'm trying to use to win.
Yeah.
And it's not about whether people like them or going to come back to see them. It's about the actual rankings. That's no knock on any
Hmm.
of the rankings that we look at. It's just to say it's smart business, but it's something that needs to be taken into account. Um, so a little bit about how I went about this list. Uh, I actually just I took each position and I just started listing and listing all the minor league players that came to mind at each particular position that I liked or might be interested in. And it was interesting and then I went through and I said, okay, this is a must. This guy's not a must. This guy is a maybe, and started grabbing 10 at a time. But the only way that process for me would really work is to actually already have like a big background as to who that player is.
Hmm.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is what stats do you use outside of the normal counting stats to actually build this out?
Hmm. Yeah. And I was going to mention this today. and I've mentioned it before on prior podcasts. I think Baseball America during COVID, when what else was there to do, right? Going in depth with articles. They had a famous article on looking at players who have succeeded in the MLB and looking back to see what they did in the minors, especially when it came to metrics. And one of their key identifiers was hard hits rate or exit velocity, along with contact, and then a developing eye as you move through there. So for hitters, that's what I look for when it comes to kind of filtering hitters out. It makes me a little cautious if a player has two of them and not the third, or if a player like Ellie, for example, obviously he doesn't have the eye now, but at least he's showing some progress in decreasing the swing and miss, moving from AA to AAA. And then I get cautious about players that go the opposite way, right? Or that really aren't developing the eye. So I have Matos at 99, for example. He was one of the highlights of that article, saying, "Hey, look at this kid." Incredible bat speed, incredible hand-eye talent to make contact, but unfortunately he's making contact with everything, right? And he doesn't have the makeup of a Vlad Senior, right? That could swing at something 2 feet out the zone and double, right? So yeah, those are the three key things for hitters for me.
Got it. So I found that because of the lack of advanced metrics that are available to the general public for minor leaguers, and I think what I see as sometimes an over adjustment or over shift in terms of valuing those metrics by the baseball community at large, what I've found myself doing was, so I created a spreadsheet with basically counting stats, right, which are easy. So counting stats not by level, but just over the course of the year. And I'll share that real quickly here, just a quick look. And so I start with the counting stats, right? And so you can see here, that's a good place for me to start. But then the next thing that I do is I look at tools, like whatever the tools ratings were. I typically use Pipeline, Fangraphs, and BP to kind of get a range of what they think each tool is. But from that point, it's just grabbing video and looking at swings and trying to understand what components of the swing look good to me, right? And where there might be holes, and then looking at some of the walk rates and K rates and swing and miss to understand where there might be gaps in this player. I think it's easy to see raw power, right? It's easy to see a body that projects to raw power in a lot of ways. So I'm not as worried about quality of contact for me, because I think that's something that really does change for a player over time. If you're drafting a Jace Young, right, and he's playing second base, going to play second base for the Tigers, from a physical standpoint, he's already kind of maxed out, right? If you look at him, he's a pretty stocky dude. And so there's not a ton of projectable power there unless he changes his approach a little bit. But someone like Matos, to me, can potentially hit 30 home runs, I think, because he has room to grow. Or a Marco Luciano, even if their contact numbers aren't, or their quality of contact isn't wonderful right now, I think that you can see it when you look at their swing, and you can see it when you see how they move, right? So there's a scouting component for both pitchers and hitters for me that's incredibly important when making these lists. So I actually looked at some video for each one of the players on the list, even if it was just 3 swings, and I say to myself, okay, does the swing match up with the numbers he put up this year? So for me, it is combining the numbers and what I see on video. But again, it's interesting that I use a little bit less of the advanced metrics currently, because A, they're not available, and B, I just think that players change, right?
Hmm.
Players really, they're if they've peaked already, sometimes you get someone who is posting, 115 max EV, and you get giddy because you think that this player is going to have tremendous power, but they may have maxed out already at 21 years old physically, and you're not going to see any sort of growth from there. All you're going to see is decline.
Hmm.
Um, the other
So
thing,
I have a question as far as position when it comes to so you are organizing according to position, which I like. I think that's underrated. So sometimes people want to say just look at the player and
right,
just from there. But especially in our league, we only have 15 keepers, so you don't necessarily have the luxury of stacking players. So
right.
was that a consideration? So you first lined up the players according to position. Did you try to balance out positions when you created the top 100 list?
I didn't I didn't try to balance the position as much as if I felt like there was a position that was really weak. If there
Hmm.
was an elite talent within that position and they stood out as the one elite talent, I might bump them up a little bit because for me, when I'm ranking based on value. And
Hmm.
so a good example for me is, spoiler alert, is Tamar Johnson,
Hmm.
right? The only other second, like true second baseman I have on my top 100, I have Jace Young, Michael Bush, and Connor Norby, right? I have four true second basemen on my list. So if you feel like second base is a position you need to fill or you want backfill for on your fantasy team, and you really value that, and you don't feel like there's someone available in the major leagues, and you see a gap between Termar and the rest, and you see Termar as an elite talent, it is really truly a 70 to 80 hit tool, and he truly has 60 power, man, you better increase his value because you're not, even if an outfielder puts up better numbers than him, as an example, that outfielder is going to be worth a hell of a lot less than Termar because of the position they play. So yes, to answer your question, I think if there's an overabundance at a position, I may downgrade them slightly. And if there's an abundant or a lack of talent at a position, I'll upgrade them. As an example, I think there's a ton of catchers. And I think a lot of them don't distinguish themselves from the next. And so I don't rank a lot of and the potential for injury and the lack of plate appearances for catchers historically. I have catchers in my ranking, but I don't rank them. I have four or five in the top 50, but they don't start until 39, right? Um, but yes, there is some positional kind of value attached to each player. This isn't just a pure numbers versus numbers sort of thing for me.
Hmm.
How about you with pitching?
As far as identifying pitchers, I think we talked a little bit about this last time. Um, Obviously I'm looking at stuff. I'm looking at I like to filter out the players that are looking good in the minors when it comes to numbers, but don't necessarily have the skills to back that up, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so I was just thinking about this yesterday. Allard was traded back to the Braves
Right.
for Odorizzi.
Odorizzi. Uh-huh.
Um, and Allard had great numbers coming up, and he was highly ranked. What was that? Maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago,
Uh-huh.
before he was traded to Texas. But he didn't have the velocity. He didn't have the spin. He didn't have the skills to support that.
Sure.
But he had the sexy numbers.
Sure.
Coming up, and even the ranks. I think he was a top 50 or maybe top 75 when he came
Sure.
up. So first I'm kind of looking for those players to filter out that I don't think are really going to be the elite. I don't want to invest in a starting pitcher that's going to be a 4 or 5 starter.
Sure.
I'm looking for, especially in a limited keeper league, I'm looking for a 1, an ace, or maybe a 2 to keep.
Sure.
Or 2 that may become a 1. So
Mm-hmm.
so I'm looking for those elite skills. I'm looking for elite skills with control. I think Kirby last year is a good example of identifying somebody that throws hard and has the pitching talent and IQ to change location, change levels.
Sure.
So I'm looking for that as well. I think it's a very simple stat, but I like the ratio of walks to Ks.
Uh-huh.
I think a very low walk rate with a very high K rate is, to me, is a good indicator of somebody who may be elite if they have the skills to back it up.
Sure.
So like the painters, the G rods, you know, they've consistently had elite numbers throughout.
What about
Like you mentioned Johnson, so I was going to put G rod in here.
right? One pitcher that is interesting, I think, got a bump from me because of what we saw with Kirby is Taj Bradley. Because Taj Bradley is a pitcher that's not, I wouldn't say he's overly impressive stuff wise. He has a great cutter and he leans on that quite a bit, but he has really good command and his delivery is so smooth that you see, for me, I see some of, not from a stuff and type of pitch standpoint, but from a command and control standpoint, Taj Bradley having some of those qualities that Kirby and an Aaron Nola type of pitcher has. And so I think the attraction with those pitchers is that there's a very high floor. There is still the same elite ceiling, but there's a very high floor with pitchers like that. Because you know they're not gonna blow up. They're not gonna have the 6 walk, 3 inning starts. I agree with you. I think that pure raw stuff is important. Velocity is important in this day and age. But the one lesson again that I learned from last year is that command is even more important than I thought it was. It's the thing that helps. There's a lot of pitchers out there with elite stuff, but it's the pitchers that you either see a delivery where that command can develop because it's repeatable, or they're demonstrating some form of control right now that you think can grow into command, right? That was part of the jump for Kyle Harrison last year, is he had a velocity jump from amateur to pro, but then he also was really able to spot his fastball up and away from right-handers and his slider down and in, back foot slider to right-handers, and he took off after that. He couldn't really spot those pitches previously. And again, that's why Andrew Painter is so great, is he's got pinpoint control.
And I think another thing there too as well is the pitcher having, this is the control that the pitcher has something where he's just staying within the zone, and so he's making mistakes and getting hit, and that's not reflected in walks to Ks, right? Somebody getting hit hard because they can't hit their spots, but is the pitcher throwing it over the plate knowingly so, and that's something that could be taught, right? If this pitcher has outstanding control, decent stuff, that could be taught as far as hitting all the levels, hitting all the spots in the zone itself.
Well, that's a good example of that for me. And I watched a bit of film on Bobby Miller. Bobby Miller throws 101 miles an hour and has a wipeout slider and has all the stuff in the world and pitches for the Dodgers. And we all know that vaunted Dodgers kind of pitching philosophy and ability to grow pitchers. And, he threw 112 innings and none of his command and control numbers really stand out in a negative way. At 37 walks and 112 in a third, hit a whip of 118. But if you watch the film, you see that he doesn't hit the mitt very often. He'll strike minor leaguers out. The telling thing for me so I have Miller all the way down to 86. And the telling thing for me with Miller is I watched him strike out a number of batters on fastballs and sliders, and the stuff was great, but he wasn't hitting the mitt, right? You'd have the catcher would be low and inside on a fastball, and he would strike him out low and outside. Major leaguers aren't going to miss. If you miss your location with 101, major leaguers are going to hit it, right? That's one of the major differentiations between minor leaguers and major leaguers is major leagues, you have to hit your spot. So I
like that metric, hit the mitt.
Yeah, I think watching that might be a good exercise, is to watch a dominant start of a minor league pitcher and then chart how many times they actually hit their location. Because if they're hitting their location every single time and they're dominant, that might translate in the majors. But if they can't hit their spot, but their stuff is so great that it doesn't matter in AAA or AA, again, that might get hit in the major leagues. So I don't know. I had so much fun with this exercise. This was the first real kind of personal top 100 that I've ever done for minor leaguers, and it was a blast.
I have another question about pitchers. So So what I'm sometimes hesitant about is the injury concern with young pitchers, right?
Sure.
And TJS, even though that seems to move fairly quickly
Right.
compared to the past. Do you look at you talk a lot about hitters reaching their have they reached their full growth physically?
Mhm.
Do you look at physicality of pitchers, how tall they are, weights, how their ease of delivery as far as trying to
Yes.
measure of whether they're an injury concern or not?
Yes and no. I think that Jeff Erickson's done a lot of work on that. Uh, and I think I'm not a doctor, right? I know it's a kind of a cop out. What I will say is if the delivery is really funky and choppy, I think of it, I think of it in terms of if they didn't have that delivery, would they be as deceptive? Right. But I also think I do see potential injury concern. Whereas you look at a pitcher with a really beautiful delivery. I guess Kirby's a good example of that. Even Logan Gilbert might be a good example of that. And I feel like or Taj Bradley's a great example of that, right? Athletic, really smooth delivery. Yes, I might increase that player slightly because I think they're less of a risk to get injured, at least right away. Whereas, who's a good example? Sometimes also that elevated velocity, right? If they're sitting 100 all the time, that's I have a moment of pause as well.
Well, everybody was high on Eater last year at the start and 21 when he had that hot start in the minors. But
Mhm.
the big warning is that with his what 3/4 delivery, funky delivery, the TGS was coming.
Right. I would love to see. I'm sure someone has done it. Some research as far as size goes and relationship of pitcher's size to injury. You know, we saw Max Meyer go out last year. Max Meyer was like 6'1", at best 6'1". And he got, he's going under the knife. Is it because he's small or is it because he's throwing a 90-mile-an-hour slider? Right. It's kind of hard to tell. Sonny Gray hasn't had TJ as far as I know. And Sonny Gray is of a similar height and throws with this similar physicality. So I don't know. So much of it is genetics too, right? We can both eat a cheeseburger and it's going to affect one of us differently than the next person.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there's any real, even Grayson Rodriguez, right? He's big, strapping Texan who throws 98, 4 pitches, looks like a robot in some ways, but he had a lat strain. And I think it was a lat or an oblique or something like that. And he was out for most of the year last year. So I just think it's hard to tell. I'd rather pick a player based on their talent, a pitcher based on their talent, and hope that they don't get hurt because so many of them always get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't help but wonder. Like I look at one player I did rank in the top 100 is Noah Schultz, right?
Mm-hmm.
The left-handed, 6'9" left-handed starter that the White Sox drafted in the low first round last year. And, his delivery looks a bit like Chris Sale, right? At least he's lanky, or Randy Johnson. Those are the comps that he gets. I don't think they're exactly the same delivery, but low 3/4, left-handed, super tall. You wonder, is that guy going to get hurt, or is it just easy gas because he has so much leverage being that tall?
Mm-hmm.
Where I have one more that I was gonna ask you about real quick here. So Tink Hence. I think we both have Tink Hence, St. Louis prospect, 6'1", starting pitcher, 20 years old for St. Louis. He's a great example of just a projectable athlete, right? When they picked him, he had a low 90s fastball, but everyone could tell based on his like physical growth that he was probably going to get up towards 100 miles an hour. And sure enough, a year later, he's throwing 100 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
How do you value a pitcher like that with that kind of projection?
Yeah, there's a lot of players on here that I moved up because of the team they're on and the organization they're in. And I think somebody with potential like that in St. Louis, as opposed to Colorado, or even a Hence in Miami, who's known for what they do with pitchers,
Sure.
is going to bump them up quite a bit. So I like his progress, and I like the culture and the context in which he is progressing when it comes to pitching, and just how well that organization does with, this is what we're doing. and we're going to put you in this program.
Right.
Some organizations I'm cautious about, and I've seen this in the last 4 or 5 years, that both on the hitting and pitching side, you start to read stuff about the player tinkering with stuff, tinkering with their swing,
Right.
tinkering with their delivery. And I'm wondering if that's, and this is coming in organizations that don't seem to have a system, right? And so with that freedom they allow the players, it just gives me a lot of caution on how well that organization is really going to develop that pitcher into a solid system.
Right. Well, look at the Rangers, right? The Rangers have, I look at Jack Leiter. Jack Leiter is like barely in my top 100. His stats were horrendous last year, but you watch him pitch and like he's classic drop and drive, and he's got a beautiful fastball with a really great spin rate, right? He can get it up in the zone, and he's got a wipeout slider, and he was great at Vanderbilt. So what happened when he got to Tech? And his dad was a freaking great major leaguer. So what happened to Jack Leiter in between then and now that made him, barely a top 100 starter when he was the number 2 pick in the draft a couple of years ago? He had a 5.54 ERA and a 1.55 WHIP, and it was in almost 100 innings. Right? There's no way that a pitcher of that talent shouldn't succeed, right? But you put him in Cleveland, or you put him in with the Dodgers, or you put him with the Mariners, and some of these teams that can develop pitching, and I think he'd be in the major leagues already. So yeah, I think that question is valid, or that comment is valid. I do think that folks that do these kinds of exercises like we do there are times where they overvalue the organization, or I guess a better way to put it is fetishize an organization. And so you just assume that every pitcher coming out of Tampa is going to be a certain way and great. When I don't think that's the case, right? You have to look at them player by player. I actually have Kumar Rocker pretty high because I think I think he's strong. He's a mentally strong. And I think his stuff is great. And I think he's going to succeed despite Texas instead of succeed because of Texas. Let's take a quick break, unless you have anything else to add, and we can come back and start our top 100.
All right, cool.
All right, Matt, let's hear your 100 to 91.
Okay, we're starting at the end. Okay, so at 100, I have Gavin Cross. At 99, I have Luis Matos. 98, I have Nick Gonzalez. I have Heston Kjerstad, Silent J, at 97. At 96, I have Chase DeLauder. 95, I have Brady House. 94, I have Matt McLean. I'm listing him as second base, by the way, and that's why he's on the list. Dustin Harris at 93. I'm also listing him first base / outfield. That's why he's on the list. Luis Campusano at 92, and then at 91, I have Jace Young.
Are any of those players you're passionate about, or you think can really rise on the list? And did you have any questions about any of them?
As far as risers, I still like Nick Gonzalez a lot. He's drafted 1-7 New Mexico State. He was a walk-on there, so I kind of like that underdog sense, right? Coming out of a small school and then drafted high from a small school. So there is admitted bias there. But he was, even with BA when he first came up on Baseball America, they had him as a number 5 prospect before the draft. He was in a hitting park in New Mexico, but this is so funny. 532 on base percentage, 773 of slug, right?
That's crazy.
College, but just crazy. But Scott, initially when he came up, elite bat to ball, excellent eye. The bat to ball really hasn't been reflected in performance. The eye has. He's been over 10% walk rate. And then the big question with him was, how does he perform against better competition? I still think some of his regression or some of the question marks there is adjustable. I think he has proven, at lower levels, I'm not sure what you would comp AFL with. AA.
Pitching wise, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, low minors, high minors, kind of in between, right? They send players who are struggling in high minors, to the AFL to kind of regain their confidence.
Sure.
But he's always performed well there. His walks to Ks haven't been bad there. He gets in these funks where he's going to strike out, in over a course of 5 games, like 15 times, right?
Right.
And then he'll go in funks where he's making tons of contact. So I was surprised. I was actually thinking his strikeout rate in the minors was well above 30, but it's averaged at 28.
Mhm.
So as far as adjusting the contact, the eye is kind of what gives me hope that he does know the strike zone well. He is a player that works hard, likes to study his swing and so forth. So
Sure.
I'm still high on him, especially with second base being such a desert.
I think
Um,
that's the argument
yeah.
is you if you have the roster space, you have to have some kind of second baseman that you believe in
Mhm.
that might develop because there aren't a lot of second basemen out there. I do not have him in my top 100. I just the swing and miss is too much for me. And the swing and he had 93 strikeouts and 269 at bats last year, primarily in Double A, and he's already 23 years old. So for
Mhm.
me, in some ways, I think they moved on. They've got O'Neal Cruz, who I don't believe will stay at short. They have Peguero. They have even a Diego Castillo type, right? So I don't know that they're counting on Gonzalez to develop anymore, which is too bad. Um, but I think even with a Nick Gonzalez at his peak, we thought maybe there was a 300 or 290 and 20 to 25 home runs in that bat, but he's also not really going to steal that many bags. So
Mhm.
even if he does cut way down on the swing and miss, I don't know that there's elite talent at his peak. And that's part of, for me, if I was to rank him in the top 100, I would at least want to think that if he gets to his 100% potential, that it's a player that's um, worth keeping in our hybrid or a dynasty league format.
I
Um,
I see peak at I still think he could be close to 315 to 20 home runs, and I'll take that at second base. It's
Yo,
not
for sure.
not going to be elite,
If he
but
does it, absolutely, I agree. I just, again, I don't see it in him. Any other players in that top 100 that you want to, or that 91 to 100 that you want to talk about?
this is an organizational one, and just working off the players' build and talent would be Chase DeLauder at 96. Um, I was looking at him pre-draft, and I was curious on who would draft him, and I like that Cleveland did. He's athletic, 6'4", 235. Most had him at 60 with speed at that build. Plus raw power, but the elite skills are his elite eye and contact.
Mhm.
And to me, and I see Cleveland and Tampa doing the same thing. They've identified the type of hitter that they're looking for maybe in the past couple of years and moving
Sure.
towards this contact EV thing. And in the past, they've been pulling players from other teams, just like they do with pitchers. But now they're drafting talents that I think can even exceed what they could teach, right? So I see DeLauder as that type of player and moving. I love their team this year, high contact. You know, the batting skills, the hit being valued, and I think DeLauder fits really well within that.
I did not rank him. He was one of those where I was looking at him and Cross, and I think you had Cross in your 91 to 100 as well, and it was one where I just didn't like the swing.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little choppy for me. Uh, Pretty big build. I don't think he's going to provide really any speed. Um, Eventually, I know he's a 60 or 60 run with Pipeline. It's not what I saw from his build and the way he carried himself when I watched video. I think there's a lot of downside with him. He also played at James Madison, which isn't necessarily a huge baseball powerhouse in college baseball. I guess I like you. I believe in Cleveland's ability to develop prospects, but he's one that I'm going to hold off on for now, and I think uh, we'll continue to watch. But I'm not a believer yet. He also fell tremendously in the draft, and he was a player they had talked about going 1-1 for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and he fell all the way to 16. All right, so my
Well,
91,
this is going to fall to a shitty org.
right? So from 100 to 91, um, my 100 was, it's not a joke, but it's there because I wanted to have a conversation about pitchers, like relief pitcher value in a dynasty league, and if there is any. At 100, I have Prelander Baroa, who is currently a starting pitcher in the Seattle organization. He's 22. He was in high A and double A last year. He was what the Mariners got for trading Donovan Walton to the Giants in 21 in the stretch run. Really fastball slider, but 100-mile-an-hour fastball, 90-mile-an-hour slider are kind of your typical current day dominant pitcher. But he's not a big guy, right? It's 5'11", and really he has two dominant pitches, so he screams reliever to me. But if he's a reliever who, for the couple years he comes up, is in a high leverage role, and is striking out, he struck out 150 batters in 100.2 innings last year. Is this the kind of player that we can potentially, like those most elite pitchers who we think are going to be relievers, is there a place for them in a top 100 dynasty list? Meaning, saves matter more in dynasty, obviously, than they do in real life. Part of why I even asked the question is we saw Josh Hader and Liam Hendricks go as high as like the end of the first round and top of the second round in TGFBI last year. I don't know if we'll see that again, but relievers are valuable. And if you can figure out who that next dominant reliever is going to be, I think there's tremendous value in that. What say you?
I'm hesitant about it just because there's so many.
Sure.
Like who do I identify as the 100-mile-an-hour fastball pitcher with the knockout slider? And teams is very volatile as far as teams doing that.
Sure.
I do like the sense that you kind of have him there as the representative of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about this when you told me you're going to put about 100 last night. There's instances in the past of closers being in the top 100
Mm-hmm.
and being drafted as closers. So Chad Cordero, the Chief, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was a high draft pick, and the Nats were grooming him when they first moved to DC to be the elite closer. So I find it interesting that we really don't see that much anymore. Right. And I think maybe the A's are kind of the first one to do it, where they converted starters to two relievers that had the two pitch mix, and it seems like everybody's heading that way now.
Right.
But I would like to see a team with go out and do that again. It would be
right,
just like a variety, right? So
the big thing to me is just the differentiation between. I think major league teams don't do that anymore because obviously the actual value that a reliever provides is very small relative to all the other positions. So it's just not worth it. I think I would say Garrett Crochet is probably the last reliever we saw drafted in the first round.
Yeah.
But
yeah, even like the GOATs closer Rivera, his WAR isn't that high compared to other Hall of Famers. Right.
That's the argument as to why he shouldn't have been in the Hall of Fame, or if he was, it shouldn't have been first ballot. Certainly not 100%. It was a joke. But again, someone like, if you can identify that guy early on, at least based on where pitchers were or relievers were picked in TGFBI last year, you got a super valuable player, right? You got a super valuable player for a lot of years because saves are one of only a few categories. But I put him there because I believe in his talent, and I think because he's 22, he only pitched in high A and double A last year. Mariners just put him on their 40-man to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. A player like that's going to have opportunity. And if he comes up and he's dominant in the Mariners pen, we all know that there are a lot of pitchers in the Mariners pen that'll go 60 innings and have 100 strikeouts. In our league, which has holds and saves as individual categories, that's super valuable. And if it's not a keeper, it's someone you might pick pretty high. The rest
these are the type of players to look for at the start of the year when it comes to draft prep as well.
Right.
And steal before anybody else knows about them.
The rest of my list, stop me if you want to talk about any of these guys. I have at 99 Brady House. Big power potential, still 19. I think worth the top 100 spot. Didn't play very well last year. Cade Cavalli at 98. Just not my cup of tea as far as starters profiles, and he's 24. Brendan Davis at 97. Never loved him, and I think tremendous power, but he was hurt last year and didn't play very well when he came back. The other thing about Brendan Davis is even if he reaches his top end potential, he doesn't have any speed. So you're looking at a power, elite power, lower average, no speed sort of player. So that's not one that I typically tend to roster.
And that was his initial value, right? He was people were eyeing him as 5 category, which he isn't anymore.
Right. I have Jackson Jobe at 96, 20-year-old. He's a number 3 pick a couple years ago by the Detroit Tigers. Very high spin rate on his slider. I just think he's going to take time. I have his ETA at 2025. I do think that ETA that's really far out should impact a little bit how you rank players, unless you think that they're a can't miss. 95, I have Jacob Berry, the number 6 pick it was a 7 pick in the draft last year by Miami Marlins. He's a DH, essentially. They might be able to get away with him in a corner, infield and outfield, but really he's just a bat. And I may not have even wanted to rank him here, but because he had really bad exit velocity numbers when he got to the minor leagues. But they're going to give him opportunities, and opportunity is a part of this ranking. At 94, Jack Leiter. We talked about him a little bit prior. Wilmer Flores, not the one with the Giants, but his brother with the same name with the Detroit Tigers, is my number 3. He's a right-handed starting pitcher. Part of my ranking him there is actually his build and his delivery I liked a lot, but he also is pitching in this enormous park. So if you can get into that rotation, there's a lot of room for error once you get there. And that is a part of my thought process with him. And then 92 and 90.
Does that affect hitters in Detroit as well?
100%. Absolutely. I think I would have seen, I think Torkelson has a lot of things going on in his head right now, as does Riley Green, but the numbers that they put up last year are not indicative of their talent at all. I think both of them are much more talented players than what they put up. And I think a lot of it is that park. Not only is that park huge, but it's cold as shit there, right? For like 3 months of the season.
So would you drop high talent hitters on your list because of the ballpark?
If they're closer to the majors, I'd think about it. It's a consideration when I think about trading for someone like Torkelson. I absolutely think about the fact that he plays in Detroit. I think you should, right? In the same way that if you have a right-handed pull power hitter that plays for the Astros, right? There's tremendous value there potentially. 92 and 91 for me are George Valera and Matt Mervis. I'm sure we'll see Mervis much higher from a lot of people coming into this year. He put up tremendous numbers last year, but he is a big, slow, bat first, left-handed hitter with the Cubs, and I think he'll get a lot of opportunity this coming year. But he's not the type of prospect that they're going to continue to give opportunity to if he can't hit. So he's got a short window to prove that he's a good major league hitter. The other thing is, with any kind of left-handed pop-up prospect like Mervis, you got to make sure they can hit a left-hander, right? Before they're on your prospect list. Because if they're a platoon player, they just shouldn't be there. Any questions?
I spent a lot of time on Mervis over the course of the year. The most impressive thing about him has been the movement in Ks, right?
Yep.
And even going from, even though AFL is a couple steps down from AAA, AAA K rate decreased incredibly, right? He was under 20%, and he's only struck out 7 times in AFL and about 60-70 at bats. His walks aren't up there. So I find him an interesting hitter. I'm kind of a little more lenient when it comes to pop-ups with first basemen, because first basemen that are hit first really aren't going to be ranked that high initially.
Right.
And when you do the initial look at him, And I think now that he has the hype, this isn't going to happen. But people see undrafted, but he was undrafted in the COVID year, right?
Right.
Um, so I don't think that necessarily reflects pedigrees like a 6th-round first baseman. Which, what first baseman other than other than ones that have like a Vaughn that have the
Right.
initial elite skills are going to be a first-round elite target.
Right. Any other comments about any of the players on my 91 through 100?
Not really, no. I think
Cool.
it's cool. There's a lot of, I had players that I initially had higher that dropped in this list, like a Matos and Campusano.
Hmm.
And you have some of those players I think will be a lot higher on the big list, right?
Right.
But
We'll get to Matos because he's quite a bit higher for me.
mm,
All right, so let's start with your 90 through 81, and I'll stop you if there's a player you want to talk about.
okay. Okay, so I have De Los Santos, Arizona, third base. Jacob Berry, I feel the same way about you there. I know you're gonna have this player a lot higher. I have Kumar Rocker at 88.
What is
Graceffa.
it? What is it about Rocker that why do you have him as low as you do?
Um he has the mix of pitches, he has the talent. It's a Texas thing for me.
Mhm.
I just as far as what you said, what happened with Leiter, or even kind of like a mid-range prospect like a Cole Winn, right? Everybody was high on Winn at the start, and he just blew up in Texas. He's a high volatility player, high ceiling player that I would have no trouble putting higher on the list if he exceeds what Texas does with pitchers.
Sure.
And I agree with you that he has the talent to do that. I just want to wait and see
Got it.
on Kumar. Graceffa, is that how you say it? Graceffa?
Gordon Graceffo. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And this is the opposite, right? A St. Louis player that I feel confident in what the organization is going to do. Here's my favorite in my 80s is Gabriel Gonzalez, Seattle Mariners.
Sure.
He's J-Rod light, doesn't necessarily have the talent of J-Rod, but I like how they're identifying these players and international players that have great bat to ball skills, mature approach to the plate. And I think he's one of those players that's still 18, right? 5'11", 180, but he hasn't maxed out yet, right? As far as physicality goes. So I could see his power increasing.
I have him at 65.
All right.
Just for comparison's sake. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think he's just a really good, he's a great hitter with a lot of like kind of balanced skill set, right? You're going to get power from him. I think he can grow into even more power. You're going to get some speed from him. And he's got really, really good bat to ball.
Mhm.
And to me, he's kind of he'll be a more of a prototypical corner outfield player.
Mhm.
But yeah, he's got a lot of skill.
Mhm. Next is a skill player, Alex Ramirez, at 85. Colson Montgomery at 84.
What is there any? So Colson Montgomery was also really interesting to watch. There's a lot of Corey Seager comps with him. And
Mhm.
I usually like players. So Colson Montgomery, shortstop prospect, 6'4", Chicago White Sox. Some
Mhm.
question as to whether he moves to third base, left-handed, very skinny like Seager was when he first came up. White Sox saw him a lot because he played high school ball in Indiana. And he was a great basketball player as well, which typically I like to see those multi-sport players focus solely on baseball. Um, I didn't love his swing. I actually have him at 59, so I'm much higher than you do, but I don't see any kind of real carrying tool with him.
Mhm. That's
There's
why I
some,
dropped. That's why I put him there. And I was surprised. So we talked about this last night that we made our lists and we're kind of looking at other lists now.
Mhm.
So Montgomery's 56, 44, 31.
Yeah.
78, 35, 57 on some of the lists. And so I was surprised. He just seems to kind of have, he doesn't have anything that stands out to me.
Not really. I think he's skilled, right? So 350 at bats last year. He was an A, high A, and double A. 11 homers. The big one for me, so I didn't see explosiveness in the bat. I saw a nice smooth swing. I didn't see explosiveness. He has a good eye, obviously, with the 381 OBP last year. Only one steal. So if you're 20 years old and you're tall and you're probably going to gain some weight, you know, as you get older, as you become more of an adult, and you're already only have one steal in 96 games, I can't take a, you know, a 4 steal guy at shortstop and then have to compensate all over the place for that. I think from a dynasty perspective or a fantasy perspective, you've created a deficit for yourself and your team by having a player like that. So yes, I think the bat could grow. I think we could see him grow into his power. He's the kind of athlete that you can see get even better, become a better hitter, but he's not going to he's not going to all of a sudden steal 20 bases. And that,
yeah, and if we're in a limited keeper league, if you're going to invest in a player, you want that player to be eventually elite,
right?
Or is a player at a rare position. But if he's going to move over to third, you know, I'm really not too interested in investing heavily in him. If he was a second baseman, I would like that consistency, that skill. But yeah, so he doesn't stand out. Pages, I have at 83. Nito, we talked a little bit about him. You made me go look at his swing. Yeah, I have him at 82. There's questions about organization, swing, but there's that second base push there. And then my favorite next to Gonzalez, and this may be my bias, I'm glad I'm not wearing the hat today to even reveal that bias more, Lazaro Montes at 81, 6'4", 205.
Mariners
only he's going to turn 18 pretty soon, right? But you know, he has the swing, he has the makeup. I could see him being the cleanup hitter for years to come in Seattle.
So when you say makeup, what are you referring to?
Oh yeah, so the makeup as far as I'm not talking about character. I'm talking more about the what Seattle's after when it comes to plate discipline, with those skills. So the maturity, not outside of baseball, but the maturity at the plate itself.
Sure. So I have him all the way up at 38.
Okay.
That
he's
also
on the so I like that.
There might also be some bias there, but he's 6'5" at this point, or close to 6'5". Built, you can see him as probably, he could be a left fielder, he could be a first baseman, he certainly could DH, but the comp right now is Yordan Alvarez, right? Because he's not he's got power, he's got a great hit tool. I don't know. I know there's not a lot. See, he was one I just had to sit and watch his swing, and think about, kind of look for holes and think about whether that swing's going to translate. But I think we will see him rocket up the boards this coming year. So maybe putting at 38 is trying to get out ahead a little bit. But I see elite talent there, and I think we might be talking about him going into next year in the top 10. I think there's that kind of potential with Lazaro Montes. So for my list from 90 to 81, 90s, Noah Schultz, 6'9" left-hander, drafted in the first round last year. White Sox, we talked about that. That's just watching him pitch. I just watched, because he has no minor league experience yet, but watching some of his high school workouts and things, you can't help but see some of Chris Sale and Randy Johnson with him. I think he could be elite. Justin Crawford at 89, Carl Crawford's son. No power to speak of as of yet, but first round pick by the Phillies, left-handed, but 70 grade speed. And I think that can carry tremendous value in fantasy if it translates into steals. I do think I bump him slightly because of his dad, and I think he has A lot of instruction and opportunity because of his dad that may help him early. At 88, I'd be interested to hear your take on Luis Angel Acuna. Do you have him in your top 100 or did he just miss?
He just missed. He's like in the 115s, 110s.
Got it.
Um, but again, where's he going to play? And I think that's going to be a key factor with his
Sure.
value in fantasy.
So I do think that I think with any hitter, really, if you can truly hit, they're going to find a place for you. I'm going to actually I'll share my screen here a little bit just to give some context. Acuna, again, I think I give him a little bump because he's got power and speed, and he's got good genes, right? Look at his brother.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he's also potentially a second baseman. So if they really want to make room for him, and he really is great, maybe they do something with Semien to make that happen. Not getting rid of Semien or putting him, on the bench, but just figuring out a different place for him to play. I could see Acuna playing in a corner as well if they had to. Drew Gilbert.
And that's my concern is if his value decreases significantly if he's in the outfield. Were you saying corner infield or corner?
No, I was saying outfield. But think about this though. We talk about Pete Crow Armstrong or Robert Hassel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the attraction to those players is they're going to be, high 200s hitter in a good year, 2020 potentially. But could Luis Angel Acuna be 2020? He might. I don't think that it's out of the realm of possibilities. So I think sometimes we just get caught up in a player with the pedigree of a Crow Armstrong or a Hassel and don't realize that they're players like Luis Angel Acuna, or even Randy Rosarena, right? Kind of under the radar, putting up those numbers.
Yeah, and I think there's the younger brother thing as well, right? So if your brother is elite talent, that's going to hurt you as far as well, you're not your brother when it comes to scouting, but I think his value increases significantly if he has second base eligibility.
Right. Drew Gilbert was a low first round pick, outfielder by the Astros last year. I have his risk as low. I think he is going to provide speed and power. He's only 5'9", left-handed, and kind of an asshole like you would think of the Astros, right? Has a mean streak, super competitive. But I liked what I saw on tape with Gilbert, and I do think that he's a pretty decent bet to provide you with double-digit homers and steals, and pretty soon for the Astros. I'll run through the rest of this list, but I do want to talk a little bit about the pitchers. So the next 86 is Bobby Miller, Dodgers starting pitcher. You see a much higher on most lists. Gavin Cross is 85, first round pick, 9th overall by the Kansas City Royals, left-handed hitter. Hunter Brown, starting pitcher, Houston Astros, is 84. Owen Casey is number 83, left-handed outfield prospect for the Cubs. 82, Kobe Mayo, right-handed power hitter prospect for the Orioles. I have him listed as a first baseman. I think if he makes it to the Orioles, I don't see him supplanting any of their other prospects to play third base. I think Gunnar Henderson's going to settle in at third, in my opinion. And then Brooks Lee at 81, one of the more boring prospects I've seen. Not one of my favorites, but low risk. I think if you're I put this wrong, it's supposed to be MIN, not MIL. Usually I like switch hitters. I think switch hitters are fun and interesting. I see him as being not like on the cusp of being keepable in our league with 15 keepers, but not really doing anything for you. Hunter Brown and Bobby Miller. Do you have strong opinions about either of those two pitchers?
No, I don't. Let's see where I have Miller. Yeah, so I have Miller in the high 30s, just off his stuff, and I've tracked him for a while. The controls an issue there. I bump him because of the organization, what LA will do, even though I'm starting to question LA with prospects, just because of they seem to be kind of overripe fruit sometimes.
Sure.
They don't get the chances, but pitchers have better chance there. Um, and I have Brown at 50.
Mhm.
Um, and I see again, I hesitate with SPs. I don't see them as ones that I would invest in, because I don't see them having elite potential, being that elite one starter or that high two starter.
Right. But I would say that, or I assume that you're not talking about stuff with either of those two. You're talking about command.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like I do think that with Brown, well, I also like Brown with the Astros. As much
Mm-hmm.
as I hate the Astros, I trust them. And as
Mm-hmm.
far as prospect development goes. And if you have an arm that's throwing 100 with a great breaking ball and he models himself after Justin Verlander, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a good place to start. I don't have him higher because I think there is some relief risk with him as well, just like
Mm-hmm.
Miller. That's why I have both of them
He's
there.
older too, at
I was
24.
just going to say he's 24, Miller's 23. There's some age risk there. So, um, would it surprise me to see either of those become number two starters? A little bit, but not totally. I think that potential is there, but there are a lot of starters that I like a lot more. And I think it's because I'm starting to value uh, command in a different way than I have previously. Uh,
Mm.
Out of curiosity, where's Brooks Lee for you?
Um, Lee, I
Top
have
20?
at 44, but I won't argue him being off the 50. I think we've talked about him before. There's just nothing that stands out for me at short for him.
Mhm.
He may be, he's one of those players that is a good, solid shortstop in real life, but as far as fantasy, it's a wait and see for me.
They
And some of the
also
things, like he's what, 24 on Fangraphs, 59, 48, 55, 37, 32. I just really wouldn't want to put him that high as most lists have him.
he so again, a similar argument as before. He had no steals in 122 at bats.
Mm-hmm.
So if he's not stealing any bags right now, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you have the different pickoff and lead rules in lower minors. So it's not like he didn't have opportunity. So if there's no speed to speak of, and we're talking dynasty, we're not talking real life, we're talking dynasty fantasy right now. Again, to have a hole at short, or even if he plays second, because the other thing is Royce Lewis is in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
I know they picked Brooks Lee for a reason, and they could potentially play. Lewis could take over somewhere else, or
Mm-hmm.
they play Lee at second. You're still taking a zero in steals with
Mm-hmm.
no other elite carrying categories.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, at
so
least the Seager type at short has the power and the hit.
right. But I think it's important to consider those things, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if we were making these rankings just for Major League Baseball purposes, I'd probably bump him up a little bit because I do have him as a low risk player. And the reason he's low risk is I think there's a high probability he reaches his ceiling. I just don't see his ceiling as something that I consider to be keepable. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He's more of a hole filler for me on my fantasy team than he is a star.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's from last year's or this year's 22 draft, there's players like Collier
Right.
that have that higher upside, or
Right.
even Merrill. Is
Yeah.
he?
Jackson Merrill's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
So let's take a quick break. We'll come back and cover another 20 prospects or so. I think we'll probably just get to 50 today and then come back with our top 50 next week. But let's take a quick break and we'll come back with 80 through 71. All right, Matt. 80 through 71.
Okay, let me pull it up here. Okay, I have Waldachuk at
Let's
80.
let's talk about him.
I know you probably have him a lot higher.
I love Ken Waldachuk. What is it about Waldachuk for you that has him at 80?
Um he's more of the, for me with SPs, it's the wait and see. And I'm now at 10 years ago, I would be the org plus with the A's. I want to see how he's going to develop there now.
Sure.
And as far as stats go too, I think there is a little bit of exaggeration when it comes to SP's performance in the Yankees system, as far as the various parks.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if I fully trust that. As far as the analysis of him as an SP, the quality of pitches, the repeatable delivery, that's a plus for me. I just want to wait and see with Oakland, because that organization just seems like a mess to me right now. And and they got good return with Estes and others from Atlanta as well. So I want to see what they're going to do with these SPs. He's, what is he, 24, almost 25. The age thing kind of causes me to hesitate. I don't see him as an elite SP1. So these pitchers, that I like him, but these pitchers are just kind of scattered in there for me when it comes to ones that I'm not highly confident as being ones that I want to invest in for being at SP1 on my team.
I so I think the org for me actually is a huge plus. You're going to give up some wins with him versus pitching for the Yankees, but that park is ridiculous, right? He went from a huge home run or a very small bandbox home run park in Yankee Stadium to the most difficult park to hit a home run in the major leagues, right?
How long is that park gonna exist though? That's my question. Is
I
it,
don't know.
if
I'm going to
it's
assume
a long-term investment?
we've had this conversation about Oakland Coliseum for 10 years now. And so I think I'm gonna assume that they're gonna be there for the time being. If they stay in Oakland, they're still gonna be in a place with kind of heavy air that's gonna suppress home runs. The bigger thing for me is so he strikes out a ton of guys, right? And he's, fastball, slider, changeup, and you watch him pitch the same way as, like, I watched a ton of Kyle Harrison because I rostered him all year. And you see these guys who have that elite, mid to high 90s fast. He's throwing 96, repeatable 96 with the wipeout slider, and it's impossible to hit. I think he is not I'm not quite sure why he's not put in the same kind of elite category as some of the other guys. But last year, he in 95 minor league innings, he had 137 strikeouts and a 2.84 ERA with a 1.16 WHIP. And what I watched on film with Waldachuk very much supported those numbers. So I have him all the way at 27. I have him sky high compared to others. He's just below Taj Bradley and just above Gavin Williams. The other thing with him is, even if so let's say Waldachuk is good, not great. I still think he's striking out 200 batters in a full season if he makes all of his starts. So if you have a starter who, as we know, if you have a starter who is who gets you 200 strikeouts, really the other stuff, as long as he doesn't kill your whip, he's super, super valuable. I think that he is Robbie Ray in an average year, meaning Robbie Ray's average year is what we might see from Waldachuk coming up. But I think there's potential for more. I love.
So where do you see his ceiling as far as SP1 to SP2 to SP3, and then where do you see his floor?
I think his ceiling is a high-end SP2, only because I don't see him getting a bunch of wins on the current iteration of the A's. I think his floor is probably a non-keepable in our league kind of year to year high threes, low 4 ERA, 180 to 200 strikeout pitcher, which still carries value in fantasy, right? I just think that elite upside is actually there with him sneakily.
A couple of notes I had that I like, just as far as bias goes. It was a team trading for him where he played at a local college. So I like he played at my sister's school, St. Mary's, just outside the Bay Area. I think that's kind of cool when teams make that trade. And not that that was a motive, but and then the second thing I do like his build. I do have the bias towards better build pitchers. 6'4", 220.
Yep.
That's solid build. It's something where he's going to have that innings eater stamina with him. So
Right. So I'll just show this real quick. This was my right. So I did a write-up on Waldachuk for my own notes in uh in September. Let's see, share screen here. So what I have on Waldachuk is, like you said, 6'4", 220. I have the Fangraph and Pipeline tools here. 92 to 96 with ton of carry, 1030 spin, sits 95. The sweeper instead of so that's the big change with him is the Yankees taught him the sweeper, and that changed big time his ability to strike hitters out. 7 feet of extension, which is close to elite. As we've talked about before, extension just means that when you release, you're releasing the ball closer to the hitter, so it appears to be faster. One of the other things I liked about him was that his horizontal movement on his fastball was 37% above the average horizontal movement for a fastball. So he's moving stuff kind of like Lodolo, which we think isn't always great, but he's able to jam a lot of right-handed hitters that way. So two other things. One is like I always say, the development of a third pitch, development of his changeup could be what makes him great. He's had very high swinging strike numbers in the minors. And then this here, so here are the 3-year rolling park factors for the two parks, right? So in New York, for a right-handed hitter, the home run park factor was 113. And for a right-handed hitter, 3-year rolling in Oakland, it was 70. So you're talking about a 43% difference in park factor for right-handed hitters, which he will face predominantly as a left-handed pitcher. For me, that's a huge deal. So all these
we need to move in the fences.
I hope not. So all these things, the development of his slider, the movement on his fastball, the incredibly high swinging strike rates, the park that he moved to me, all of those things really do matter. And I do see the potential for a high-end number 2 elite strikeout number starter moving forward with Ken Waldachuk. I don't know. I guess I'll die on the Waldachuk hill, but he's I would call him one of my guys at this point in time. All right. Did you finish out your
No, that was my first one, and you jumped.
Oh, geez, we just went.
No. I was anticipating that when I put 80. I knew this is gonna be a long conversation.
That's hilarious.
But again, there's I'm not going to die on a hill in going against him. There's a couple of hitters in here that I really like. One I think is going to be in the top 50 at the end of the year, and one's going to be in the top 20. So this is my top 51. This would be Kevin Alcantara with the Cubs. 20 years old, 6'3", 193, has a good build. I like his eye. I like his elite contact. He's at 33 hard hit rate in minors so far. He just has that combination. He hasn't passed the AA test. He's just single A. But he's one that I'm going to be tracking.
Question.
Yeah.
Does it change anything that he grew to 6'6"?
He's at 6'6" now?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Does that change anything for you?
Yeah. It doesn't change anything negatively because he's like Wood in the sense that he's not showing those holes in his performance that you would expect from a tall hitter.
Sure.
With that makeup. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, so I used to have Luis Matos at 78. I think I replaced him by Amador with Colorado.
Mhm.
Um, and then I have Peraza at 77. A lot of that depends upon what's going to happen with the Yankees. It seems like Volpe is going to get the chance at shortstop to be the shortstop of the future. If Peraza moves to second, I think he's a good value at second base. And then here's my top 20 at the end of the year. Emmanuel Rodriguez at 76. He doesn't have the height and the athletic build as Alcantara, but he has elite eye skills, elite power for his size. Hard hit contact is incredible. He's in a good organization that's going to develop him as a disciplined hitter. I just see very high upside there when it comes to power. He's not going to be what is never going to put him into the top 10. He's not going to be the 5 category guy, but I could see him being a very solid 4 category outfielder across
I
the
also
board.
have him at 76, which is kind of
Oh
funny.
wow, oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. We have an agreement there.
I have him at 76 and also as a low risk fantasy wise. I think he's a kind of a can't miss type of player. The question is just, as you said, the question is going to be, is he elite or is he very, very good?
Mm-hmm. And then Tanner Bibby at 75. That's
Who?
organizational. Tanner Bibby, Cleveland starting pitcher, double A now. Um, and then that's the Cleveland bias for me
Sure.
when it's pitching. This one has been all over the place on my list. Quinn Priester, Pittsburgh SP. I don't see elite talent there, but I do see high floor there eventually. This one you have a lot higher. I'm not going to argue with you that you do have him higher because I feel the same way about him. This is Christian Hernandez at 73.
Mhm.
Matt Mervis at 72, and then Mick Abel at 71.
Cool.
Who's been very who I think has been under the radar. He was at the top of the radar at the start of the year, but since Painter kind of came to the central focus with Philadelphia, he's kind of been undersold, I think. But
All right.
I still confident in him.
Okay. Let's see. I can't stand Priester. Not as a person, nothing personal. I think as a prospect, I'm done with him. I just don't, again, even if he reaches his current potential, I don't see him as a keepable starting pitcher. The other one is I have Christian Hernandez at 30. And I know that there are a lot of folks have kind of cooled on him a little bit after last year. But the explosive, he was in rookie ball last year. He's 18 years old, shortstop prospect for the Cubs. The common comp has been A-Rod. Not that they expect him to be a Hall of Famer, but he's got that kind of smoothness, build, carries himself very confidently. I enjoyed watching the little film I could find on him. He's one of those guys, you see him as an 18-year-old and he screams major leaguer in
Uh-huh.
everything that he does. Last year in rookie ball, in 157 at bats, he had 3 homers. He had six steals. I'd like to see him have a little bit more discerning eye. He only walked 13 times, but I think I tend to dream too much on some of the really young prospects. But I see a star in Hernandez. I see a 330 home run type of hitter that could give you double digit steals as well. I think he's a superstar in the making.
Mhm.
Beautiful.
And I think he's a
Swing.
good conversation point too, because he had a lot of hype last year, right? Even with Pipeline, they were saying
Mhm.
when it came to Watson, Lawler, the shortstops coming up, they were really promoting Hernandez, and he didn't necessarily have a good year. But at the same time, the dude's only 18. Why aren't you sticking with, he's almost 19. Why aren't you sticking with what you were saying about his talent from the start?
Yep.
And this is very low minors. You don't know necessarily what is going on with his development. I to take him off a list at this point, I
Right.
just think is egregious. It's
It's
not fair.
it's tinkering, and it's like I said, I think some of it's for clicks. I think there's a lot of tinkering that goes on because people get bored. But really, the prospects are, especially international prospects, it's a long game. If you see
Mhm.
talent in that player, you got to let the player have ups and downs. It's just like raising a kid.
Uh,
You got to let them have ups and downs. You got to
uh-huh.
let them stumble. You got to let them, even like a Kelnick, right? I still believe in Kelnick's talent, but
Mm,
he had never failed, right? And
mm,
he doesn't know how to fail. He's learning how to fail for the first time in his life. Doesn't mean he's not a potential 25 home run, 10 steal guy. It's just he's failing right now, but he's got to be able to pick himself back up. So if you
mhm.
believe that Christian Hernandez is 60 hit, 60 power, 55 speed, right? That doesn't change because of 100 and some odd at bats in rookie
Definitely.
ball.
Uh-huh.
It just
Yeah.
doesn't. So did you really
Let's see
believe
him
in
in
him?
A ball, high A, double A,
Yeah.
and
I asked the
let's watch
question,
him
did you
develop.
really believe
You
in
know,
him
it's
or
weird looking at the list. So Fangraphs still have him. They have him at 57, but Fangraphs isn't necessarily updated. So,
right?
but then all the other lists have him off the 100. BA, BP, Just Baseball, and James Anderson, so on and so forth, all
Right.
off the list when he was quite high in the top 100.
Unless they're
And
seeing something that we don't see.
mhm,
I think that there's a lot of chasing the new hot thing, right? And
mhm,
he wasn't the new hot thing, but he was one of the guys that people wanted to talk about last year. And again, the talent doesn't go away unless there was a misdiagnosis of his talent before he came stateside. He comes
mhm,
stateside and they say, okay, he's not the guy we thought he was, right?
mhm,
That's the only way you can really justify that. But I have not seen that in the write-ups. And I certainly didn't see that in the film that I watched. Um,
mhm.
I still like him a lot. I think he's the shortstop of the future there
And
in
it's a good
Chicago.
system too.
They're going to
They're
develop
gonna
him.
move young guys through. I think Chicago has a really bright future, especially with their young hitters.
I do too. So my 80 through 71, again, stop me if there's a player you want to talk about. I have Henry Davis, former number one pick, Pittsburgh Pirates catcher at 80. Zach Neto at 79, shortstop, LA or Los Angeles Angels. Um, I told you to take a look at his swing when I saw his swing. It's one of those that I know he's made a lot of contact and he's been a good hitter historically. He's a good hitter in college, but it is ugly. I do not like his swing at all. I also don't trust that organization to develop its non-superstar prospects. We'll see what happens with him. Uh, Kevin Parada at 78, catching first round pick, New York Mets, catching prospect. Um,
I have him at 67, so we're really close on that.
Similar. Can he be 270, 25 home runs? Yes. But you wonder what's the plan with Parada and Alvarez for
Hmm.
them? Is one of them going to become, an outfielder or a first baseman or a full-time DH? Um, so if he's not catcher eligible eventually, then his value goes down as well. But I didn't love his swing. He's 21. And I tend to devalue catchers. I have Dustin Harris at 77. I agree with the first base outfield thing. He's interesting because he gives you speed and power. But I don't think he's an incredibly explosive athlete. I don't think he has much of a ceiling, but he gives you a decent floor. I have his risk as low fantasy wise, and I do
Hmm.
think he'll get opportunity in Texas. Again, like I
Hmm.
said, I've got Emmanuel Rodriguez at 76. Uh, One of my what do you call it? Like one of the guys I love and will stump for is Christian Vaquero. I have him at 75. He was a big international signing by the Nationals last year. He's 18, switch hitter, 6'3", just explosive tools. You haven't really seen much from him yet. He had 176 at bats in rookie ball, one home run, but 17 steals. One that I think you'll want to talk about at 74 is Sal Frelick.
Hmm.
Where do you have him in your top 100?
Yeah, I have Frelick at 57.
So we got similar ranks with him. What's his upside for you, and how do you value that upside? I guess is a better question.
He's one of those that he's going to get on base good contact. Not going to have power. And I don't like that with outfield. If he's an infielder, I would be willing to compromise with that, especially a mid infielder. But he's one of those that may have been a 20 steal guy, but with the new SB outcomes based upon the new rules, I could see him sneaking in a lot more. So that's why I didn't put him too far down. But I don't see him as a high ceiling outfielder, and I don't necessarily like investing in an outfielder like that. He may hurt your OPS. I would rather invest in a Crawford that could give me 60, 70, 80 steals.
Sure.
Because that's going to put me over the top in that position. I could plug him in when I need those steals.
Right. I think he's a player that I'll watch. I'm not in love with his skill set. To your point, I think you're lucky if you get double-digit home runs from him. He hit 11 in 492 at-bats in high A, double A, and triple A last year. And he hit 331. I did watch him hit a little bit, and I like his bat to ball quite a bit. 52 walks and 63 Ks in 492 at-bats. So he's gonna put the ball in play, and he's fast enough. I agree with you. I think he's the type of player that will benefit from the new rules. But if speed is your carrying tool, it's what everybody talks about, and you had 24 steals in a full season of minor league ball last year, I don't know if it's certainly not 70 speed, but is it 65 speed or is it 55 speed, right? And at that point, the speed's not quite the type of elite tool that I think you're looking for. I think he carries more value in a pure dynasty than he does in like a hybrid like ours, like our league, because we can find some of those stats in drafting those last 15 players. Whereas in a pure dynasty, I do think that if you can count on getting those steals from him with a little bit of power, he can play some sort of role. Also, one other differentiation, if you're in like a 5 outfielder league or a 4 outfielder league, he's much more valuable than in our league, which is 3 outfielders. 73, Tink Hence. We talked a little bit about him. I think we may see him also shoot up the ranks. We talked about the type of player or pitcher he is. I don't think we have to go over him anymore. But he is high risk at this point in time. He's not thrown any more than, let's see, last year he threw 52 in a third innings last year.
And they have him going in for one inning performances in AFL.
Right. So they're clearly kind of taking it easy with him.
Those 1 innings are fun to watch, though.
Yes, agreed. 72, Spencer Jones, the 6'7" outfielder drafted by the Yankees last year, left-handed, pretty short stroke. If you really want to dream on him, you can see him hitting a shit ton of home runs for the Yankees in the right field porch. He's not a 0 speed either. In 25 games in A and high A last year, he had 12 steals. So he might be sneaky fast as well. He'll probably get a little helium on the Yankees. I don't love him. It was interesting watching him play because he looks almost awkward because he's so big. But he certainly will. I think he may, if he has a good season, I'm assuming he starts in high A or double A. If he has a good season in double A this year, I think you could see him rocket the prospect ranks. And then 71, Tyler Soderstrom. He'd be much higher if he was still a catcher. I think the A's have pretty much decided he's a full-time first baseman. 20 years old. He was in high A, double A, and triple A last year. He hit 267, hit 29 home runs, but 145 strikeouts. So is he a star at first base? No. He's probably more in that, I think at his peak, kind of low-end starter in a 12-team league. Any thoughts with any of those players? Anything you want to add?
Not really. I think we're pretty close there. So,
cool.
So he's just 10 closer for me.
Got it.
As far as and I'm not too impressed. I think there's better first basemen to invest in with higher upside. And the K's were shocking to me. Because initially he was scouted as this high contact, great eye type of player.
Yeah. Let's move through 70 through 61.
Okay. Here's go back to my list. Okay, so at 70, you're gonna like this one. As I say sarcastically, Ruiz, I have at 70, Milwaukee outfielder. And Norby, I like a lot. I could see him moving quite a bit up.
Connor Norby.
Yeah, with a second base eligibility. That's where he's going to be in Baltimore with the power and the hit, and that lineup. Even more than Chicago, I like what Baltimore is doing now, and I see them very much as a team of the future. Yeah.
Can we go back to Ruiz real quick?
Yes.
I have
You
him at
raised your
60. I have
hand.
him at 68.
Okay. Okay.
And
Good.
so I actually have him higher than you do. Here's why. I think you can't ignore even so this is an instance where you look at him, you watch him play, you know, his obviously his speed really does stand out. You don't know that he has a role, a definitive role, right? In
Mhm.
Milwaukee. They talked about him being a super utility type of guy. They don't really know what he wants to do. You can't ignore 85 steals. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Especially with the 447 on base. He takes
Yeah.
walks. He's not going to hit 332 like he did last year in the minors, but he takes walks, right? He had 66 walks in 114 games.
Mhm.
And if he gets the opportunity, and he also had 16 homers. So say there's a bit of a reduction in power and OPS in the major leagues. If you give a player like that 500 at bats, there's a very good chance you're looking at 40 steals. He's got
Mhm.
that kind of speed, and it could be more with the rule changes.
Mhm.
If I told you that you could have an outfielder or even a multi-positional player that had 12 home runs and 40 to 50 steals, where would you value that player, right?
Yeah, they'd be high in the draft, and yeah, and
Exactly.
the nice thing too, in most because he initially came up as second base, so most formats, Fantrax, Yahoo has the second base eligibility still because he's a rookie and he hasn't lost that 2B, so he's a great sneak at second base next year for leagues,
Right.
and I do like he did have I we talked about during break that I with my players as I'm doing deep dives, I'm going back to the initial scouting and looking at the current scouting, and he did have pedigree when he came up. You know, they were even comping him with a Soriano. He doesn't obviously have the power anymore,
Mhm.
or hasn't developed that power, but he does have that pedigree of kind of the lean, athletic, fast, quick bat type of player, and he
Right.
did I've seen some analyses online of his swing, and he did make significant changes this year. So the comp they're giving with the changes he's made are to Buxton's swing that he really doesn't have. He's very quick. He just loads back and swings, which is a significant change from a couple years ago, the way he was swinging. So yeah, and Milwaukee, of course, is interesting. I just wish I texted you when they re-signed Wong, right? Because I
Mhm.
was hoping that they would play him some
That
back
second.
at second, yeah, because that's where his value is going
You
to be.
could. I think I could. I think if they wanted to platoon, if they wanted to sit Wong against some tough left-handers, I think he could see some at bats at second base for sure. I just if we're talking strictly fantasy, right, and we're talking dynasty fantasy, give me a lottery ticket like Ruiz over like the Colson Montgomery no steal profile with no
Mhm.
real carrying tool, right? Let me take the guy who has double digit home runs and 85 steals. I granted, like he may be a backup player and get 300 plate appearances a year for the rest of his career, but it's worth taking a chance, especially in a dynasty format where you roster a ton of players. To me, he carries more value than I think we're giving him credit for. And
Mhm.
for background, he was a player that I used to talk smack about because Matt rostered him and I said he wasn't worth anything.
Yeah, that's why I was making that comment when you raised your hand.
Right.
So at 68, I have and this is one that's been on my list, got injured. and I can't take him off yet, is Max Meyer. We'll see what happens when he comes back. There's always been the reliever question with him too, and after this injury, where's he going to end up in that rotation?
It's
I have
funny.
Parada.
I have him at 64.
Oh, okay. Well,
Pretty
yeah.
close.
I have Parada. I think we were close on that as well at 67. Here's one I haven't done a deep dive yet on, but I like his makeup. I don't like his park or his system. This would be Brandon Pfaadt, who has made a lot of progress this year. I think we're close on this next one with catcher. I never was particularly impressed with standout skills with Henry Davis. And I actually have the other Pittsburgh catcher higher than him, who
I
Andy
do too.
Rodriguez.
I
Yeah,
do
yeah,
too.
I love Rodriguez. And then I have Leiter at 64. I just can't pass on his talent. This is another reliever slash SP that's all over the place with control and repetition. DL Hall. At 63, I have Brian Rocchio at 62. But this next shortstop I like a lot better because of his park and the potential offensively. He's already on the top defensive shortstop at Edwin Arroyo at 61.
So I have Arroyo all the way up at 37.
All right.
I love everything that, and I had done some research on him as a Mariners prospect. I think moving to Cincinnati does nothing but help him because he's going to have quicker opportunity because I don't think they're going to be in contention. And watching him play, he's another one kind of like Christian Hernandez. You see him on the field and he just screams major leaguer, the way he carries himself. His swing is really pretty. Last year in 116 games, he put up 14 homers and 27 steals and had an 846 OPS. There's power, there's speed. He's a defensive wizard at short. And if they're moving Marte to third and Ellie somewhere else in order to play Arroyo, it's pretty clear what they think about his talent. So, I think Edwin Arroyo, we're going to see move up the boards really, really quickly here. I don't have Rocchio ranked at all. I think there are other infield prospects that are just much more worthy of that ranking.
I have them listed at 2B just because, how is that infield going to work out? But then, look who they have currently at 2B. So there is issues as far as positionality with him.
Right. So I'll move through 70 through 61 real quickly. Will you have time to break and then come back and finish up? Awesome. At 70, I have Austin Wells, older catching prospect, left-handed hitter for the Yankees. He's put up good numbers.
He's going to stay there?
Maybe. But I think he may still just have eligibility there. He could be the kind of player that plays there 20 times a year. I think he's got a bat that'll carry him elsewhere. I like the fact that if he is catcher eligible, he had 16 steals last year. And as a left-handed power hitter, that short porch in right field is very inviting there. I have your absolute number one favorite player of all time at 69 and Curtis Mead. Third base, second base prospect for Tampa. And he's a good hitter. I don't think he's a great hitter. I also always wonder whether a player is going to have more than 400 plate appearances for Tampa Bay until they could prove themselves to be a superstar, essentially. Esteury Ruiz, like we talked about, 68. 67 and 66 are Brandon Barreria, I can't pronounce it. Left-handed starting prospect for Toronto. His first-round pick. Was picked in the 20s, but I wonder if there were signability issues maybe. Left-handed starter from Florida. Watching his film, man, I love watching him pitch. The comp that I saw was Ron Guidry because he's a smaller left-handed pitcher.
I like that comp. That's old school comp.
I loved it. 66, Emerson Hancock. He's gone up and down the boards. Former number 6 pick of the Mariners. Right-handed starter. I think we all saw him in the Futures game strike out the side. I don't think he has number one ceiling. I also don't know that he's going to strike out a tremendous number of batters, but I think he's going to be a very effective pitcher. And if he can stay healthy for the Mariners, he'll slot in, I think, number three, kind of in that range. So worth rostering. Not, I don't think he has elite upside, but I think his floor is pretty high as long as he stays healthy. As we talked about, 65, Gabriel Gonzalez, 64, Max Meyer, 63, I have Gavin Stone, starter for the Dodgers. He is 24. But I think that I like what I saw from him last year. I know the Dodgers are pretty high on him, and I do think he gets opportunity over Bobby Miller because of his age and where he is on the developmental curve. I also liked his command quite a bit, which I can't say about some of the others. In 121 and 2/3 innings last year, he struck out 168, walked 44, and had a 1.48 ERA with a 1.12 WHIP. That's high A, double A, triple A. 62, Connor Norby. He's another one of those kind of, power packed second baseman. He had 29 homers and 16 steals last year on 3 levels. He is 22 years old. The assumption is that he is the kind of heir apparent at second base for the Orioles. And then 61, this is all projection, but I have Dylan Lesko at 61, the first round pick of the San Diego Padres. He dropped in the draft because of having Tommy John surgery at the end of his high school senior year, but he would have been the top pitcher selected had he been healthy. Did watch some film on him before he got hurt, and he's I like Dylan Lesko quite a bit, and I do like that organization. Any comments on any of those guys?
Not really. No. I like how you're peppering in some draft picks of this year.
We'll take a quick break. We'll come back with 60 through 51 and wrap it up.
All right. This is gonna be
What was that?
This is gonna be a long one.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. 60 through 51.
Okay. 60 through 51. Let's see. Okay, this is where I have Cavalli at 60. Then at 59, I have Michael Bush. Soderstrom, we talked about that at 58. Frelick, 57, we talked about him. This one's kind of low compared to other lists. I have Gabriel Moreno at 56. I have Jackson Jobe at 55. Tink Hence, who I like much better than Jobe, but they're next to each other here, 54. And then I mentioned him in the last round of 10, Endy Rodriguez, catcher for Pittsburgh at 53, Gavin Stone at 52, and one that is the Tampa pitcher who's often hurt, that was a lot higher on my list at the start of last year, was Shane Baz.
So for transparency's sake, we talk about players quite a bit, you and I, but we don't talk about where to rank them. And I say we may have big opinions about players, but I don't know that we influence the other person's opinion all that much. A lot of our work has been very independent, especially since the end of the season. I say it because I have Endy Rodriguez at 60. I have Gabriel Moreno at 58, so below a lot of the other catching prospects. And I have Michael Bush at 51. So we have a lot of the same players that I think some outlets would have higher, a bit lower. And I wonder if it's because we're looking at players through the same filters. We don't look at the same sites either, which is interesting. So I find it fascinating that we have some of the same takes on players. I wonder if it's more of an influence of one on the other person, or if we've gotten to a place where we're starting to see the same sorts of things that are actually true. Moreno, I need to see power, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I need to see power, and he hasn't shown it yet. And so, yes, does he have great to bat the ball? Absolutely, he does. he had 3 home runs in 238 at bats in AAA last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though he hit 315, he only had 806 OPS. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
cut it, especially when you're comparing him to the other catching prospects that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Or even his teammate Kirk, right? At least Kirk has
Totally.
the contact with the power, right?
Totally. Here's an interesting one for you. So looking at the Endy Rodriguez profile, I think that there's some talk about him maybe taking some outfield reps, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with Henry Davis kind of being the primary catcher there in the future. Uh, for those who don't follow, he's triple slash in high A, double A, and triple A last year of 323, 407, and a 997 OPS. He had 60 walks and 101 strikeouts and 458 at bats. And he had 25 home runs.
You could argue he is one of the top 5 hitters in all of minors last year.
Totally. So my question for you is, and I have him as mid risk. I don't know if he'll put up a season like that in the majors, but if he has catcher eligibility, he'll take anything close. Here's my question. You look at him, and for me, I'm thinking about keeping MJ Melendez as one of my 15. So we keep 15 of 30 in our league. MJ Melendez currently is a keeper for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we're starting to see more of these Endy Rodriguez, Austin Wells, multi-positional hitters with some power, right? Is it worth it for me? Is MJ Melendez that elite where with someone like Endy Rodriguez as a 22-year-old on a bad team, is he the same player, or is he 95% of Melendez and I can keep a player at a different position with higher upside, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is Endy Rodriguez, I guess what I'm asking is Endy Rodriguez worth me questioning keeping a player like MJ Melendez?
It's a good question. I think there's questions as far as power goes, right? Melendez could knock out 30 to 40 easily, right? And he's going to be between 20 and 30.
Right.
So there's that power element. But Endy can get, even if he backs up Davis, he'll give you multiple eligibility. He's good enough hitter that he's not going to hurt you in the outfield.
Right.
If on an off day on a Tuesday or Thursday, if you want to plug him into your lineup as an outfielder.
Right.
Yeah. So he is switch hitter too. I haven't looked at his splits, but that's interesting as well.
I think
only
the
22, so he's not like some older pop-up, right? So he's made it to AAA at 22. Yeah, so he's one of the most impressive players to move up the board for me.
the broader question, I guess, is just that when you start to think about the number of catchers that can hit that are coming up and that may actually get 500 plate appearances because they have multi-position eligibility. It's not like when it was Buster Posey and everybody else, right? Or even last year when we looked at it, it was kind of Real Muto and at the end of last year, it was Real Muto and everybody else. Maybe like Varsho, yes. Contreras kind of. I think there's going to be a lot more depth at the catcher position. And that depth has staying power because of the trend towards having multiple catchers playing catcher, right? And so and then that bat staying in the lineup at other places. I'm wondering if I'm valuing the individual talent at catcher too highly because of a previous narrative about the depth at that position. And that Endy Rodriguez is not necessarily a 1-for-1 swap, but he's representative of that shift.
I think a lot of it has to do too with how catchers are going to be picked this year, right? Is our league going to go after these young catchers?
Right.
Is Moreno going to be kept? Those type of
I hope not. Not based on what I see from
Moreno. You know what? When I moved his ranking way down here, that's when the rumor came out 3 days ago that Toronto's going to trade one of their 3, and they were thinking Jensen, but Jensen's a defensive guy, right? Could it be Moreno? I wouldn't want to trade Kirk. Would they trade high with Moreno? If
they may. I was wondering too, like, is he, I know he has his tremendous defensive ability. But I wonder if he could be the kind of player that could play all over the place. I could see him in Tampa thriving, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think it'll be Jansen because Jansen is arbitration eligible. I think they'll trade Jansen and keep Moreno and Kirk. I think that's the easy solution. Um, but yeah, if you're gonna sell Moreno at any time, it's right now because I think people are ignoring his lack of power.
hmm
It could be 45 power, right?
hmm
It could be 65 hit, 45 power, which fantasy purposes is kind of interesting. But if you have him as your catcher, you almost kind of have to have a second catcher that can hit for power.
hmm I have
Uh,
a couple of questions here, and these popped up on your list. So your take on Michael Bush,
mhm.
and one that came up on my list, and I know it's not on your list because you told me a couple of days ago would be Bass. So I want to know why he would not be on your list.
uh, Baz, I would say probably should have been. I would have put him. I should have put him really kind of back to back with Max Meyer. I see him in the same category. I think they both have elite talent. Um, but you just don't coming back from TJ. I don't really know what it looks like, and I don't know if I'm willing to sit on a pitcher who is going to spend a little over a year not pitching, and then the next year getting his command back, right? So you're 2 years out, 2+ years out with both of those guys. Um, I think the oversight may not have been Baz being off the list as much as it is Meyer being on the list for me.
Mm.
I
This is
the
interesting. I thought Baz was bigger, so he's just 6'2", 190. So he's not
Mhm.
doesn't meet that kind of elite profile of a Perez,
Right,
the big solid, or a Hunter Green, the big solid athletic
right,
pitcher.
right. My take on Bush, I really like him. Uh, I rostered him for a while last year, so I watched I watched a lot of the end of his AA time and some of his AAA. I know he struggled out the gate in AAA, but he ended with 32 home runs, 108 ribs, and an 881 OPS. And
hmm
if you can get, like we talked about at second base, if he's a 20 home run guy and he hits 260
hmm
and he's got second base and outfield eligibility, man, that's super valuable in fantasy, right? Uh, he's not going to
I've
give you
been,
any real speed, but
yeah.
his discerning eye, his ability to take a walk and hit for power is super valuable. I know the comp has been Max Muncy on him. The bigger question to me is not his talent. I think he is talented, and at minimum will end up being a back end 12 to 15 team starter at second base. The question is playing time,
hmm
and if they do trade him, where does he go?
hmm
Uh, I think they'd be foolish to trade him. If it's me, I know that Turner's probably going away. Vargas takes over at third. They'll probably move Lux to short unless they sign somebody at
hmm
shortstop. And then second base, I could see them moving Muncy more into a 400 plate appearance type of guy and playing Bush primarily against right-handers at second base. I like him. He's number 51 for me.
hmm
Um, and again, some of it is position, but a lot of it is just that power and discerning eye, and the
hmm
Dodgers' ability to take that profile and make them into a star.
hmm Yeah, I've always had him even last year ahead of Gorman at second as far as the power hitting second baseman, just
For
because he does
sure,
have a turning eye.
for
And
sure.
I think I've mentioned this on the last pod. Um, he worked counts better than anybody at AAA last year as far as the number of pitches taken. So that is going to affect the K rate. And the other thing with I think that's often forgotten with the Dodgers is Oklahoma City isn't necessarily a hitter friendly park factor
Right.
place. So I think that could be thought of. I found it interesting that the Dodgers didn't call him up at the end. He's almost 25 now.
Too.
You would think he would have helped them at that run in the end.
I wonder if so. A couple things. One is obviously there's always service time stuff, and that might be a consideration. But I also think that, and maybe I'm reading into it too much. But if you let him finish out his minor league year and don't promote him, you're looking at a 32 home run second baseman that hit 274. Okay. If you promote him in September and he tanks, right? Which the probability, it's a higher probability that he's shitty in September than he is great, right? That's just baseball, and baseball with players coming up. Then what does that do to his trade value going into this offseason? It's sure 32 home runs, but he couldn't hit lefties and he didn't hit righties very well in his month and a half in the major leagues versus not bringing him up. And all you have to look at is that minor league success. I think it was smart. If you didn't have to bring him up, don't bring him up. That's how I perceive it. I might be completely off base, but that's how I perceived his not being called up to the majors.
Whereas a Vargas, he already has that reputation. If he did struggle, but he's still tradable if you're not going to.
Right. I also don't think they were ever gonna trade Vargas. I think they see Vargas as a cornerstone for them moving forward, whereas Bush is a little bit less so. That's my perception.
Their GM said Vargas is one of the top prospects he's seen in the organization in the last 15 years. So.
Right. So my 60 through 51, 60 was Endy Rodriguez, 59 Colson Montgomery, 58 Gabriel Moreno, 57 is where I slotted Luis Matos. I went back and I watched probably, I don't know, 20, 30 at-bats of Matos just because I really wanted to see what the hell's going on with this dude, right? He was a top prospect last year. Like you said, the physical tools are there, the speed, the power. I think that there's a lot of, as you said, his hand-eye coordination is so good that he makes contact on pitches he shouldn't be chasing and then makes weak contact, which is why he hit 215 last year. But I think that's something that can be taught. I think I would rather come into it with a player with incredible physical tools who's displaying incredible bat to ball skill that I can teach to look for certain pitches or just say like, all right, here's the deal, bro. You don't get to swing at the first two pitches, right? You have to take strike one and strike two, or you have to take everything you identify as a breaking ball, whatever it is. You give him some rules to start with and then see if you can't see him sort through it, as opposed to the player that can't make contact. It's more difficult to teach a player to reduce their swing and miss than it is get a player to be more disciplined at the plate, right? And if he's not,
he has
go ahead.
high pull side stats, and that's not so much as just tapping into power. It's just he's just so over anxious. He's right. Starting over swinging right from the start,
and pull side and having being pull heavy in 22 is a lot worse than being pull heavy in 23 because of the change in rules, right? So if he's hitting the ball on the ground to the left side with 65 speed in 22 in the major leagues, that's an out. In 23, some of those are going to be hits, right? So I just think the other part is this might be foolhardy, but I believe in the Giants organization and even if there are deficiencies in their ability to teach hitting, right? We know they can teach pitching. If there's deficiencies there, I trust the organization and the manager to be able to learn to get better at something they're not very good at. I just think they're really progressive. I think they're smart. It's an organization that I trust in terms of player development. And I think there's a decent probability we see him back in the top 20 or in the top 20 at the end of this year. And international prospects go up and down, man. Like, I think there's a lot of up and down with international prospects, and he had a down year. He's got to learn.
And there's injury factor, and that was weird. Just Eugene this year was weird. We were even thinking of meeting in Eugene just because it's more or less an all-star team there, right? Luciano struggled, had injury problems, and it was cold as hell in Eugene early on. There were tons of rainouts too. You really couldn't establish yourself consistently there unless you're a pitcher like Harrison, where you're going to have the advantage there. So yeah, I'm giving a pass on both of both of them.
There's also this is a little bit maybe digging a little too deep, but I also think that you're talking about a 20-year-old that was in rookie ball in high A, who is from a warm weather climate, who you just stuck in fucking Eugene, Oregon, right? Like yes, it's a college town, so it's a little bit more interesting, but he's in Oregon, in rainy ass Eugene, Oregon, right? After growing up in a different kind of environment. And that's not an excuse as much as it is, I think, just a factor, something to think about. I may have said this on a different podcast, but real quickly, and I think about this lesson all the time in soccer. A lot of the elite European teams would sign top African talent, right, to play for their teams, and there was this misconception about these African players that they weren't really any good because their talents wouldn't translate once they got to the European team. And what they realized was it was the cultural adjustment that was keeping them from really thriving, because nobody really thought about the fact that if you brought your family, you had to bring your family who may or may not speak the language, who may or may not look like everyone else. You don't know where your ethnic community, if you want to be surrounded by people like you, if your ethnic community exists in that town, or where to find it. There's no familiar food. Quite often the weather is completely different, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure on you to thrive right away, right? So what they started to do was actually assign an assistant or a counselor or basically a helper to get the player and the player's family adjusted quickly. Their investment in these players is tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, right? It makes sense that you pay someone 70 grand to essentially be their assistant and help them acculturate. So these players now know that their kids are going to be in good schools, and they're pointed out where the Senegalese market is in Paris, right? Or whatever it might be. I just find that really interesting that we don't apply that to baseball as much. Not thinking about Matos being in Eugene. Whereas an American drafted player, right? If you were drafted, if you're playing minor league ball in Florida and you grew up in Texas or California, it's not that freaking different. And so there are, not to mention the resources that are available to you on the high school circuit in the States versus elsewhere. But I just think that that's something you can't quantify it necessarily, but a talent like Matos, who, is might be 60 hit, 60 power and 60 run, is not, you have to ask those sorts of questions before dismissing him as a bust, I think.
Yeah, he's already been taken off 2 lists, which is crazy. But
I think it's crazy.
Especially if you're touting him as the model of what isn't teachable with a hand-eye, and where he could go with that hand-eye and a hard hit. His exit velocity was down this year too, but a lot of that has to do with injury, with weather.
Right.
And you just got to be patient. He's only 20 or 2021.
It's what we talked about as far as a player, their talent being their talent, and like the Christian Hernandez conversation, I think applies here too.
Just doesn't fly away.
You look at their organization and their prospects. They're going to give him all the opportunity in the world as a 20-year-old with that kind of talent to develop. He might not. I have his ETA as 2024 and his risk as high, but it wouldn't surprise me for his ETA to be 25. But take that talent, give him 3 more years in the minors to develop, right? He's still only 23 years old. So I don't know. I like Matos a lot. 57 felt low to me, but that's where I have him for now. 56 was Ezekiel Tovar. I think that it's interesting because I think that Colorado prospects that can hit, I think we give them a bump because of the park immediately. And I don't know that we've seen them develop prospects really. The thing about him is his defense is so special at short that he's going to play. And I think that's a plus. But I don't know. I can't trust Colorado yet. No matter how talented that player is, I have a really hard time trusting them. So he's a wait and see. If I'm completely off and he's a top 10 prospect, then so be it. But I'm not buying in until I see Colorado develop players a little bit better.
What do I
55.
have? Tovar. Yeah, I don't think I have him in the top. He's in most top 20 lists. Last I saw. Yeah, I have him at 34.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was an early investor in Brandon Rogers, so that leaves a lot of bad taste in my mouth when it comes to
Right.
Colorado people.
Well, all of them, man. Sam Hilliard, right? The first baseman the two first basemen they drafted in the first round. Um, I don't see them. They don't develop a whole lot of homegrown talent.
Mm-hmm.
So 55, Pete Crow Armstrong. I'm not a huge fan. Uh, he doesn't walk a ton or enough for me yet. There is speed, there is some developing power. But the power is just kind of started to I think he tweaked his swing a little bit to get to a little more power last year.
I have him at 45.
He's one of those players though that I think I'm starting to value more because he's going to give you power and speed. And so his upside for me in fantasy is probably a high-end outfield 3 or a low-end outfield 2, but he's not a cornerstone type of player for my team.
He gets a lot of press because of his defense too, which is worthless when it comes to fantasy baseball, especially for an outfielder.
Yes, he also I think he came from the same high school program as Lucas Giolito and Jack Flaherty and Max Fried, if I'm not mistaken. And I wonder too how that sort of publicity or characteristic impacts ratings as well, right? Even though it's a different position, major leaguers came from there, so you're thinking to yourself, okay, that's going to be another major league player. I don't want to go too far into that, but he kind of has that fits a certain stereotype that people are chasing. I have Oscar Colas at 54, Cuban outfielder, Chicago White Sox. He's 24 years old. He had 23 home runs last year, 3 levels. Doesn't take a walk, really. So he had 38 walks in 117 games. Here's a player that I was prepared to rank probably 25 spots lower. And I watched some film and I watched him swing and I said, that's a grown ass man right there. Right. And it's a short swing. It's a really pretty short swing and he's athletic. I think he may blow up in spring training and actually start for the White Sox next year. He's a talented dude. He pitched quite a bit in Japan when he went to Japan after Cuba, and he's a great athlete. To me, he's sneaky, and he's a player I might look to acquire or draft myself in our league. So I have
he was on and off my list, and honestly, the off my list thing was maybe I could sneak him later in a draft. I don't want our league. Maybe they won't listen this long
to be aware of him
podcast, but
that's funny. No, I like him a lot. I think that he's got tremendous power. And like I said, the video is what got me to bump him about 20 spots. I was watching his swing. It was short, it was quick, and there's a ton of power there. Explosive athlete. Jace Young at 50. Go ahead.
Chicago youth too. Now that they're not going to have their manager sleeping in the dugout, will be. I'm a lot more confident, even in Lewis Robert coming back and having a good year.
Right. Jace Young at 53. I have him listed second base outfield. He was funny because he can hit for sure, and he's got power. He's another one who could be 60 hit, 60 power. Boy, he's slow. He's pretty stocky, and I wonder if his range gets so bad at second that they have to move him elsewhere. He was that kind of I hate to use the word, but almost stodgy to me.
Was he 6 feet 205? Yeah, yep. But really built.
Yep. And kind of he's one of those maxed out dudes, right? Where I think his power is going to be his power. Unless he makes a swing adjustment, he's not going to become more physical.
Mm.
But I think I have him as a low risk. I think he's gonna get through the system pretty quickly. You know, he's probably a 20, 25 home run guy. Uh, if he hits above 260, I'd be a little surprised, but not my cup of tea, but I think is worth being ranked here. Oswald Peraza, excuse me, is 52. I have him listed as shortstop, second base. He already has some major league at bats. I didn't like his walk rate in the minor leagues this year. I think he's a little swing happy, struck out quite a bit, but you can't ignore 19 homers and 33 steals, and the fact that the Yankees have not traded him uh, when looking to acquire stars. Right, they've held on,
Mhm.
which I think says something about how they see Peraza in the future. And I
Yeah,
like what I saw.
they have their second baseman, shortstop set up for 10 years, I think, with both of those. And I
Yep.
think Torres is going to be gone.
Yep. Well, then think about this. If you're a team like the Yankees that pays huge salaries, right? And you have a second baseman and a shortstop who are above average offensively and defensively for the next, say, 6 years, right? Before they're free agents, you can spend money everywhere else. Where they need to be spending their money is with pitching. We all know that. And so if they can lock up those two positions, even if it's affording Aaron Judge, I think Peraza is a part of the Judge salary equation as well. So he'll have opportunity. And like I said, I really liked what I saw from him. I just want to see him be a little bit more disciplined at the plate. And there
Mhm.
is that low floor because of the amount of swing and miss.
Mhm.
That's why he's
He
not
is
higher.
he's interesting too because Yankees always get the press, right? But I think where he's being evaluated at is very fair because you could weigh that with how he's overshadowed by Volpe.
Right.
So I think he doesn't get as much attention because of that.
I agree. Well, this was fun, man.
Yeah.
You have anything to wrap up with before going?
Not really. I'm glad we're in the off season. I'm looking forward to trades. I'm looking forward to free agent signings. I'm looking forward to the next couple of days seeing what teams like Tampa are going to do with their 40-man roster.
Right.
Yeah, so it's moving forward. It's going to be catchers are going to report just a few months. So
Yeah.
looking
Man, you sharing with me that the Mariners were talking to Brandon Nimmo. I was so excited for free agency, and I'm so pumped to see what the Mariners end up doing. And that just, I'm not a fan. And you got to be really bad for me to not be a fan of a high OBP outfielder. But no, I'm not. That would suck. Um,
yes, yes.
what
I,
do you
I
think?
I hope they tell him to get off Twitter if they do sign him.
Right?
Just shut up.
Do you think that the Mariners will? Do you think the Mariners will sign a middle infielder? Because that's been the rumor,
Um,
right?
yeah, because second base is pretty much open, right? Um, yeah, I think they're eyeing that, or even with a trade.
Right.
Um,
Do you have a preference?
um,
Not Dansby Swanson is my preference, but
yeah, I don't think Dansby would do very well here. Yeah, he's and it's stupid to sign somebody off a career year like that, right? And he's
right.
going to be asking for a big contract. Um, I would um, I would think that would be, what if they go all out for Turner?
I would love to see it. I think what I read was he wants to go to Philly
Hmm.
and that he's an East Coast guy.
Hmm.
And so being in LA was hard for him as well. But of course, yeah,
Money,
I'd
money.
love to see Trey Turner. I think Bogarts is a possibility.
Hmm.
I I think Boston would actually be silly to sign Bogarts long term with Mayer coming up in 24.
So they
Um,
need him the second if he signs with the M's and
no, I think Bogarts is your shortstop and JP plays second.
okay.
Or Bogarts plays third and you figure out I don't think they would do anything with Suarez, but I think eventually Bogarts would move to third. But
Yeah,
no,
without the shift, that's a cool strategy because JP will be a Gold Glove second baseman if he moves over
right.
there.
We'll see. I'm super excited. I'm also excited to see that they see Haniger in the same way that I do, which
Mm-hmm.
was worth a 1 year, $8 to $10 million contract, but not a qualifying offer and not a long-term contract. I think a lot of Mariners fans are upset, but it is all counting stats.
Mm-hmm.
He did
And
it.
his
His
injury
21
rate
was,
is.
I think he had 700 plate appearances in 21.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, it'll be interesting. Super, super interesting.
Cool.
This was fun, man.
Yeah, yeah. We'll do the next 50 next time, and then hopefully do some really deep dives into the list. And maybe we could even pull out some share screen video too. That would be fun.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do this real quick before we go. Do you have anyone in your top 50 that is complete, or maybe two guys that are completely random off base in your top 50 that as a little teaser for what's to come?
As a teaser, well, why don't you go first?
Sure. So at 46, as my, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. As my number 13 pitcher, but number 46 overall, I have Bryce Miller, the right-handed starting pitcher for the starting pitcher in the Mariners organization.
All right.
24 years old, got up to Double-A this year. I actually got to watch him start for against Tri-Cities for Everett, and it was freaking lights out. Fastball, slider, 133 and 2/3 innings, 163 strikeouts, 1.04 WHIP. Has like almost like the Strider profile, and I think that the Mariners are really good at developing that. So I have him at 46. I know there's some Mariners bias here, but I also think that their ability to develop players is elite at this point. The other one that I will share is I have Cam Collier at 15.
Okay.
Cam Collier was the number 17 pick by the Reds. Left-hand, I've talked about him a ton. Left-handed hitter, son of Lou Collier. He is, of course, super small sample size in rookie ball, 9 games, 27 at-bats. He had 2 homers, 7 walks, 6 strikeouts, hit 370 with the 514 OBP. Crazy part is he's still 17. So Cam Collier, I think, in a year and a half, may be a top 10 prospect. So those are my 2.
Yeah, I have Collier in the top 50.
Nice.
And that's very different than most lists. He's not even on most lists, right? His lowest is going to be 60. Yeah, so I don't have any shocks as far as in the top 50, but I have ones that are ranked higher or lower. I don't have Jones as high as most lists have Drew Jones. I have Wood as the highest compared to most lists. I have Wood at 8. And let's see, and of course I have Johnson in there. Some sites don't have Johnson in the top 50, but the good ones do.
Crazy, bro.
Yeah, I know. I have Elijah Green pretty high just on talent and build alone.
Where do you have him?
I have him just at the threshold of the 20s at 21.
Nice.
Yeah, so I've had Painter in the top 10 for quite a while, so that's not a shock for me. Most people, I think no list has him in the top 10, but I love.
Where is he for you?
He's at number 7 for me.
He's at 6 for me, and I have Kyle Harrison at 10. So it goes Painter, Harrison at 10, Grayson at 11, and then here's another. So I have Daniel Espino at 16. And Espino is like, people are all off of him because of his injury.
Like, where is he?
But it was I think it was a knee injury, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, where is he, right? He's really not getting much outside of the injury. They're so quiet about injuries in the minors. He's
right. But
really
he's 21. He was in Double-A. He didn't have an arm injury, which arm injury is different, right? Of course, 18 in the 3rd innings, which is small sample set. 18 in the 3rd innings, 9 hits, 4 walks, 35 strikeouts.
Yeah.
Like, how do you drop that dude? You could even make an argument that
19. And then the other one this player, Brooks Lee, is ahead of him on most lists. He's listed at 55, 40, 42, 30, 56, 51. I have him at 17, and that's Mason Wynn, shortstop, St. Louis.
Yeah, I got him at 20. I love it.
Mhm.
All right, man. Can't wait.
All right, cool.
Do
See
next
you
week.
next time.
Good to talk with you.
All right.